This is Lynn at Cheese and Yogurt Making, and we continue our journey of counties of cheesemakers from across England. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Hugh from Bath Soft Cheese in Somerset. Good morning, Hugh.
Good morning, Lynn. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good.
Brilliant. So you've got such an impressive history going back 4 generations there at Park Farm. Would you mind telling me a little bit about the history and how it began going back throughout the family?
Sure. So my great-grandfather, Edward Spadfield, moved to Park Farm. I always think quite happy. It was just before the First World War broke out. And, you know, that war wasn't expected to be the massive war it turned out to be. So you can imagine the hopes and expectations they had. And we've even got the original contract that they signed, the tenancy contract they signed. And I can't help thinking how, you know, dreadfully tough it must have been those next 4 years. But the farm has kept going. And what's nice is we farm the same area of land and we farm a little bit more. We got the opportunity to buy the farm. My father bought the farm that we'd previously tenanted, and then we rent additional land around that. So we've got about 160 cows now on the dairy farm, and we're organic, so farming in much the same way that my great-grandfather would have farmed, with no fertilizers, no pesticides, and making cheese, which is actually what my great-grandmother did as well. So my great-grandmother, she made cheddar. My grandmother, actually, they stopped making cheese on farm, like many farm-based cheese production. But my grandmother actually taught cheese making. And then it was in the 1980s that my father decided to start making cheese again. And he was looking at making a cheddar, much like my great-grandmother, mainly because cheddar has traditionally been the cheese that Somerset was most famous for, in his mind. And he knew that his great-grandmother had made it. And he was actually experimenting. He was making cheese in the same building that my great-grandmother had made cheese in. But a friend of his said, but there was the Bath cheese, the really famous Bath cheese. And my father said, well, he says famous, I've never heard of it. And he said, well, I'm the president of the Admiral Nelson Society, so I know that this cheese was made back then. And I know that Admiral Nelson's father wrote him a letter saying, I know you're very fond of it. You and Lady Hamilton, who was his lover, are very fond of it. Please find to attach. So my father then learned how to make this Bath soft cheese from the original recipes that he found in the Bath reference library. And then on the back of that, that was when I was a boy growing up on the farm. And so on the back of that, we then looked at making a hard cheese and a blue cheese and finally a wash rind cheese. But I went to university and I came back to the farm back in about 2010 to run the farm and run the cheese business, and we've grown quite a lot since then. But it's nice to think that all the way through there's been a herd of cows grazing on this farm. So I mean, it has changed. I think my great-grandfather farmed shorthorn cattle. I think my grandfather then moved to Ayrshires. I think my father then moved to British Friesians and then kind of more Holstein Friesians. And when we say we changed the breed of the cows, we're not saying that we got rid of the herd. We just bred in those new breeds. And so you get what they refer to as crossbred vigor in the herd. You get a very healthy herd because you've got the genetic makeup of those previous milking cows within the herd, but you've bred in another bull, another type of herd. And that means you've still got that kind of that genetic health that we see even in humans, where, you know, that you haven't concentrated the breeding too much. And it's nice to think that there's been that continuation of the same land, the same genetic makeup of the cows, always producing milk. And but actually we passed a new milestone recently. We went, so even today, some of the milk that we produce on the farm, we sell about 10% of it now to another farm to bottle and give us bottled milk. But in the run up to Christmas, there was a couple of weeks where for 2 weeks straight, we used 100% of the milk we were producing on the farm for cheese. And that was a new kind of milestone. So over 100 years of farming and cheese making, we finally got to the point where we were using absolutely all our milk to make cheese.
That's amazing. That was a milestone there. That brings us up to, that means such an incredible history. You must be very proud, and you're a part of something now which, you know, the company's quite big now. So day to day, bring us up to what's happening right now at Park Farm. Day to day, you've got how many cheesemakers, how many people working there? What's going on there now?
So when I was a boy, my father typically had just 3 guys on the farm typically, and today we've got 4 guys working on the farm. We've got 10 cheesemakers. We've got quite a big staff for our farm shop and cafe, which obviously a lot of them are part-time, but you're looking at about 40 or 50 members of staff. And then we have people who help us with the farmers markets. We have a unit at Borough Market in London where we sell our cheese. So we've got 3 employees in London, and it's a different scale of operation to what it was. I was thinking recently that it was a shame in terms of, I've got 4 children, and when I was a boy growing up on the farm, my father would put on his overalls every morning at 7:30, and you know, if we were feeling like we wanted to get outside, which we often did, we would go along with him even from a very young age. And if you are wearing your overalls and you're feeding calves and you're clearing out the bedding from a pen, or it's very useful having even an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, 10-year-old there, and we all had our own pen knives and we'd cut the bales. And now I get up, I'm still up at 7:30, but I tend to be sat in an office looking at a computer discussing who's going to do what. And that it's far harder to involve your children with that. And of course, they're quite keen to work on the farm, but they want to work alongside me as opposed to with one of my colleagues. So it's really great that we've got so many people involved. It's a little bit sad that we've lost some of that small scale nature. And the irony is that actually back in my father's day, the farm was considered reasonably large. So we are farming today. We're farming more land. So we're farming about 600 acres, all organic. We've got a similar number of cows in the herd to what he had then. So because we're organic, it's very non-intensive. So, you know, the grass grows a bit slower. We don't get so many cuts of silage. But by modern standards, our farm is now quite a small farm. Because smaller farms have tended to cease being a business, and only big farms have stayed in business. We're now considered quite a small farm. But the irony is that the business as a whole is bigger, and then makes it harder to have the kind of the small farm feel that maybe it did when I was growing up.
That's very interesting. And obviously you've got your children, they're the next generation, and it will just remains to be seen how involved they may or may not become. And that's an interesting, you know, they're either going to be or not, but only time will tell on that one.
That's right. You can't put too much pressure on them. It has to be, I'm fully aware that they might also decide to do something else. They don't have to be the 5th generation at Park Farm. No,
they don't. But it'd be nice if 1 or 2 of them were, if not all of them. But as I say, they may go in their own direction and then come back. Who knows? That doesn't often happen as well.
Interestingly, my father said that one of the primary reasons why he went back into cheese was he could see that there were limits to what could be done with the farm. I mean, the thing about farming is it is very constrained, obviously, by the amount of land you have. And he could see that to make it provide new challenges for me and my siblings, he wanted to create a wider business, a more diversified business. And that's kind of why he created the cheese side. And I think that showed a lot of foresight, because actually it does make it opens up the possibilities and makes it far more interesting. And it did help to attract me back into the business.
Brilliant. So you've got obviously you've got the setup there, you've got the shop and the cafe, I believe, as well. Very much selling your cheeses, I presume. Can you tell us a little bit about the soft cheeses you do there? I know they've got some fantastic names. The Merry Wife is a particular good one. I don't know who came up with the name. How did they arrive? Did you make those names up?
So I mean, obviously, we've got our four cheeses. We've got our Bath soft cheese. That was the first to go up with, and that really was named for being the cheese that the traditional Bath cheese that it is. Um, my father then came up with the name the Wife of Bath for our semi-hard cheese, the one that's a little bit like a Gouda but not pressed. And what he was doing there when he made the Wife of Bath, he was trying to make a cheese like the traditional cheeses that farmers would have made when milk was beginning to go sour. So, traditionally, all farms in the days before refrigeration would have made cheese, any milk that had started to go sour, because obviously, when milk first goes sour, that is the first stage of cheese making. It's the lactic acid bacteria that's in the egg getting into the milk, beginning to acidify the milk, beginning to kill the milk, and once that starts happening, obviously, it's not so good for drinking, and so the natural thing for farmers to have done before refrigeration, when milk started to go up very quickly in the heat, they would then add rennet and make a very simple curd, and then put those curds into a basket or in a cloth that we would hang up, and you'd have a very simple cheese. And that was the kind of cheese that my father was trying to recreate when he made the Wife of Bath. And actually, there's many more cheeses that are made in a similar way now around the UK, and they're very much, I think, equivalent to the kind of the Tom cheeses you get on the continent, Tom de Savoie, the cheese of the region. It's just simple cheeses, and so he thought that being a big fan of literature, he decided to name it after the character in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the Wife of Bath. And she was a kind of a traditional character, and also quite a fun character. We then, in 2010, we started experimenting with making a blue cheese because I was a big fan of Stilton, and we thought it'd be nice to make something similar to a Stilton. And so we developed the Bath Blue. It's kind of our take on a Stilton. It's a little bit creamier, a little bit sweeter than a Stilton, and not quite as harsh, maybe, as some Stiltons. And that had quite a straightforward naming. But then when we came up with the next cheese, I was talking to the cheesemakers about the various experiments. So I'd be showing people around the cheese making rooms or the cheese ripening rooms, and there would be curious cheeses on shelves. A wash cheese here, a hard cheese there, a strange mold on a cheese, and I knew that everybody who makes cheese, it's nice to try and experiment to make something new, to try and make a different cheese. So I said, come on, let's take one of these experiments and actually add it to our range. And so we had a little competition, and we have every Friday. We all sit down, all the cheesemakers sit down, and we taste the cheeses together to see how they're doing, and kind of check that they're all tasting as good as they should be. Anyway, so we sat down with all these cheeses, and one of the cheesemakers had decided to wash a soft cheese and a Wife of Bath in the cider that my father had started making on the farm, and they were delicious. The soft cheese, as we then continued the experiment, the soft cheese, it tended to be a little bit unstable. Some weeks it was absolutely incredible. Other weeks it was a little bit too much. But the firmer cheese that was basically an evolution of the Wife of Bath but washed in cider was always so consistently delicious. So we decided to run with that. And then there was a question about what to name it. And so there was kind of all sorts of suggestions about how we named it. Wife Insider was one suggestion, but I was thinking it'd be nice to have another literary link. A friend said, well, in Shakespeare, and Shakespeare has some associations with our village, Kelston, he said in Shakespeare, it's only the Merry Wives of Bath, the Merry Wives of Windsor, not Bath, Merry Wives of Windsor, that mentions cheese. And there's a Reverend Hugh Parsons who is very fond of cheese. And there's a line where a man says, I'd rather trust the Reverend Parsons with a cheese than my wife with another man. And so I thought, well, that's an interesting little slant on it. Chaucer, Shakespeare. I mean, then one of the cowmen walked in and he went, I reckon, Hugh, I reckon you should call it the Tipsy Wife or the Merry Wife, because she's been soaked in cider, hasn't she? And I was like, there we go. That is the answer. That we should call it the very wife. So it was both a literary reference and a more basic cider reference.
Was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. What a story. What a brilliant story. I love the fact you'll sit down on a Friday and taste the cheeses. Isn't that refreshing and such a great idea to all come together once a week? I love that.
Yeah, and particularly at the end of the week when everybody, I mean, when we started off, we started with it on different days. And often on a Friday, everyone is a bit worn out. I mean, we also make cheese at the weekend, but most people are off at the weekend, and there's often that sense that people are just dying to get away. And I wanted to make sure that everybody finished together and kind of said, well, almost like said, well done together for a good week.
Yeah.
And having the cheese tasting, it does mean that you sit down with a kind of relaxing finish to the day. And occasionally we'll open a bottle of wine or have a few beers.
Wow.
So it's good. Yeah.
That's absolutely lovely. Well, I think that's such a nice thing to do, and it brings everyone together. There's a whole team thing going on there, and tasting the cheeses, certainly opening the bottle of wine. I'm all in favour of that. Going back to the cheeses, so where do you sell them? Where can we buy them? And where do you generate most of your sales? Is it in the shop or is it online?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, we have benefited, particularly over the last few years, of having quite a spread of ways in which we sell the cheese. So, like every cheesemaker, particularly every artisan cheesemaker who sells to restaurants, we had a very scary start to the pandemic, where we thought, well, in the first week, our sales were down by more than 50%, and we had wholesale customers phoning up, begging us to bring back the cheese they'd collected the previous week, obviously just before the lockdown kicked off. Obviously, all the restaurants had closed and they had nowhere to sell the cheese to. And so I did, out of, they'd always supported us. I did even take back cheese. You can imagine the situation. We'd lost half our sales and we had cheese coming back from the previous weeks. But we were very lucky that obviously the farmers markets kept going, and online, we developed our online to quite a good stage. We invested more in it, and that really took off and bore us through. But generally now things are getting back to normal. We see about a third of our sales goes to the restaurant food service, basically to good restaurants and good pubs. About a third of the sales goes to wholesalers that supply independent delis and farm shops. And a third we supply directly, either through our own direct sales to farm shops and delis, or through the farmers markets and our own borough market and our own farm shop. So we've got quite an even spread, kind of a third across those. And I feel that puts us in a very strong position to react to when things do change. And as we know, in recent years, things have dramatically changed from one week to the next. But in terms of actually saying where you can buy it, I always say, I recommend that, you have a look for a decent deli, farm shop or cheese shop near you. If you walk in there and ask for our cheese, hopefully they'll stock it. But even if they don't stock it all the time, they'll be very easy for them to source, because we supply pretty much every wholesaler who sells into the farm shops and delis throughout the country. And it's often hard to know exactly where it is all the time, because obviously those wholesalers are a little bit protective about who they're selling their stock to, and I can completely understand that. From our point of view, it's really important to support that whole ecosystem that sits around the artisan, from people like yourselves who help supply us with the equipment and the ingredients we need, to the farm shops and the farmers markets and the delis and the restaurants who support us by buying the cheese.
Well, it has been an absolute delight to speak with you today. It's been fascinating hearing the background story, explaining where you come from, all about the cheeses and where you can get them. It's been absolutely wonderful on a lovely sunny day to sit and chat with you, and you're outside where you like to be, out in the sunshine. So thank you so much, Hugh, today for taking the time out to chat with us. It's been absolutely wonderful, and we look forward to chatting again soon.
My
Thank
pleasure,
you
Liz.
so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.